Something I talk about pretty frequently is how battle magic is the best lore in the game, and Arcane Urgency is one of, if not the best spell in the game. Now, this does vary from army to army. Not every army wants to take battle magic, but some armies really do, and I think if you've got a dragon, you're really missing a trick if you don't take Arcane Urgency. Dragons are incredibly strong, and Arcane Urgency isn't only benefiting dragons, but I think they are the strongest pairing with dragons, because ideally the way you want to be using this early on in the game, or if you can get an opportunity, is to make it so your opponent can't escape from you. Sometimes by doing that, or most times when you're doing that, the option that you give your opponent is to charge you. So while, yes, you could put, for example, a unit of cavalry in front of your opponent, they might just decide, you know what, screw it, I'm going to get charged anyway, I'll charge you. That might not go so well for you because you're not going to be at range to countercharge. So in this case, I'm going to be talking specifically about dragons. But if you've got another unit that you can get up the board and do a very similar thing with, or if you've got a brick of infantry that you can steer to shadows, this is a very comparable strategy, so something to keep in mind. If you've got Steed of Shadows and you've got Arcane Urgency, you can definitely put that unit of infantry wherever they want to be, despite being movement 3 Chaos Dwarves or whatever it is. Not that I think Chaos Dwarves can take battle magic. Anyway, by the by, most of this video is going to be physical examples. I'm going to show you what I do in Warhol. I'm going to talk through, the basic Arcane Urgency positioning. I'm going to talk through how to deal with if your opponent has counters to your spell, and I don't mean counterspelling you, I mean specifically their own Arcane Urgency or ways to get out, and I'm going to talk about overlapping fields of charging, and let's talk about the overlapping fields before we get into the physical examples. Everything that I'm talking about, I'm using turn 1 examples as if you've gone first, because that's the easiest way to set it up. But you can do the same turn 2, turn 3, turn 4. If you can engineer a situation where you can get in front of the opponent's unit, you're in a good spot, and you can do that super easily because you've got Arcane Urgency. So just remember, this is all game, but it's easiest to do turn 1, especially if you go first. So overlapping charge fields. What am I talking about? Well, I have found that the strongest way to get this very early points lead where your opponent is near helpless to avoid it, so you can start getting those big differentials, is if you take a dragon and then a second dragon or something like a Noblon Griffin. You want a second backup piece. It doesn't have to be a character. You can use, for example, if you were playing Chaos, you might want to go for a Chaos Lord on Dragon and then a Warpfire Dragon. Or instead of taking a Warpfire Dragon as your second piece, you could use a unit of Chaos Knights. It doesn't necessarily have to be an absolute killer unit. It just has to be something that's reasonable. Heavy cavalry are a really solid backup for dragon armies, especially if you're playing Arcane Urgency. Why is this? Well, they have the movement to avoid getting charged where you don't want to be charged, which is really nice in terms of keeping a strong points differential, and that's probably something I should focus on, in future videos. But it gives you the flexibility to either be outpositioning your opponent or setting up to charge your opponent on turn 2, which I guess is outpositioning, but avoiding or setting up charges is how I should talk about it. So the second unit, it doesn't have to be a second ridden monster, but I think that's a very strong way of doing it. Why am I talking about overlapping charge outs? Well, it's actually kind of easy to avoid a dragon. Not all armies can do it. If you're a Chaos Dwarf player and all you've got is ranked up infantry and steam tanks, I'm really sorry, you're going to get charged. Honestly, that's probably fine. You've probably built that into your game plan. You've made it so that you can set up, you've got overlapping buffs or debuffs. So if a dragon charges you, it's not an insta-loss. But if you're playing something that's skirmish, or if you're playing something with cavalry, or if you're playing your own Arcane Urgency army, you can quite easily stay out of a single dragon's charge arcs. Where does it get difficult? It gets really difficult when there's 2. And overlapping charge arcs is probably the hardest thing to do in terms of positioning with an army. Because you've got to be able to conceptualize where your opponent can get to. And that is Really easy if they're playing ranked up infantry or ranked up cavalry. Really difficult if they're playing skirmishers, but it is the only way that you can ever catch a skirmishing army if you're playing, some sort of monster list, because wood elves really like not getting charged by dragons, and they're really good at it. So how are you going to do it? We're going to talk a bit more about examples, but my sort of go-to is I have my tankier, my killier dragon, the main focus. That's the one that goes straight up and gets the positioning, that's you're going to really struggle to get out of. The secondary threat, which is maybe it's a wizard on a dragon, or maybe it's a BSB on a griffin, or it's your unit of Chaos Knights, or it's your unit of Silver Helms, whatever you've gone for. That unit is going to be sitting further back, giving the overlapping charge arcs. And you basically just want to make sure that whatever your opposing unit's maximum movement is, the back of their base is still within your overlapping charge arcs. That's the extent of it. Hopefully that makes sense, but let's go into examples, and we'll start off with how to play the basics, and then we'll go through and show all of the rest of it. Let's have a look at some physical examples. So in this example scenario, we've got an opponent with a unit of heavy cavalry, we've got a unit with a character on a chariot, and then we've got ourselves here, we've got our noble, we've got our noble BSB, which is our secondary cover piece. We've got our dragon, which is the main piece that we want to use Arcane Urgency on. And we've also got the wizard, just in their unit of Valyrian Reavers. Normally, I would have these bunched up more closely for the sake of making it visually obvious what they're doing. They are just in a raid in a skirmish formation. So, first order of business, you want to mark out 15-inch range on your wizard. It's not important that you do this in Warhol. If you're playing in person, just mark out with dice where you want to make the maximum distance. The reason for that, Arcane Urgency has a 15-inch range. So 15-inch bubble around this wizard. And again, if you're doing this with dice in person, you don't have to do a full bubble. You just mark out like a die, something like this. If you went like a dice, or a die. There we go. So we've got 4. We're marking out the rough extremities, and then you just want to double check as well, but it makes it easier for you to position where you want to go. First order of business, we're going to move the dragon. A dragon can march 20 inches. So we're going to start off by going for the Chaos Knights, because they're easier to show. But if you're going for the Exalted Champion, what you wouldn't want to do is you wouldn't want to just fly forwards the full 20 inches, because you can see here, we're out of range. I really like trying to get my wizard into casting range, leave my dragon in casting range of Arcane Urgency before I move my wizard. It almost always means that the wizard is going to be out of dispel range on turn 1, unless your opponent's got something that's increasing the dispel range of their casters. And, if that's the case, you can move backwards if you need to. It's quite important that you get the Arcane Urgency off. So let's go back to here where we've got the dragon. And we're going to aim to go for the Chaos Knights. So, first order of business, let's array roughly where we want to be. I'm not going to be super precise, but you do want to be relatively clear with where you want to be. So we've wheeled 1 inch, we've moved 17.5. So with our 20-inch march move, we've still got another 1.5 inch. So we're just going to wheel like so. Now I'm wheeling away from the direction I want to go in. You can see the vision I'm covering. I'm assuming my opponent has other things. This kind of covers me. It's not ideal positioning, but it's better than if you didn't have, if you fail the Arcane Urgency, you don't necessarily want to just be pointing this way, because it can really limit you. So we're here, we're going to cast our Arcane Urgency. It goes off on a 10. We've cast it on an 8 plus 4, that's a 12. Our opponent's looking for a fated, all the good stuff. If you're playing High Elves, you've got an inbuilt reroll. If you're playing Dark Elves, you've got a once per game inbuilt reroll. This is the most important thing that you can use the reroll on for your spells. Those are the, Lilith's Blessing or whatever they're called. Other armies where you don't have that level of reliability, you might want to consider taking a Power Scroll, honestly. I think it's very important to get this off if you've got the opportunity to, and even if you don't do it turn 1, it might be something that you want to do later on down the line. But points can be difficult when you're squeezing in expensive dragons. So we're in range, we've managed to cast the spell on our prince, and now let me show you where you want to be. So the main thing to know is you're going to park in front of the Chaos Knight. So you could just go like this. You could go very centrally. You could get to here, be about an inch away, like so. And that's fine. This is sort of step 1. Let me just get rid of the deployment zones. So this is step one, and I'm going to show you why they can't get out, and then I'm going to show you how to maximize it. So the first thing that we're going to see here is this unit cannot wheel forwards on the left, can't wheel forwards on the right. So there's no way for them to march because you can't do two maneuvers. You can't, turn your facing, you can't reform, and then also march, which means the maximum that they can move, realistically, is they could move sideways 3.5 inches. In fact, let's assume that they're an 8-inch move cavalry. So they're going to move 4 inches sideways. That's not good enough. They could also use I believe it's called whichever the move is called, I'll put it up on the screen because I always get the names of these wrong. The one where each model turns 90 degrees. You can use a quarter of your move to turn each model 90 degrees, and this doesn't actually show it properly, but if we put in, there we go. So each model has turned 90 degrees, and they still have 6 inches of movement. So let's say the wood isn't there, just to make it as good as possible for the opposing player, and then we move 6 inches. As you can see, we're still not getting out. Where does this fall down? Falls down with drilled, and it falls down with opponents having arcane urgency. Because if you have drilled, let's just go back here. Let's say this was the unit. If you wanted, you could drilled into 2, reform like so, and then just march round, something along those lines. Some combination of, or if you're drilled, you could not drilled. If your opponent's got arcane urgency, they could do something as simple as, move 4 inches and then march off. Maybe not this way, but there's plenty of ways that you can get out if you've got arcane urgency. So as you can see here, unless your opponent has either the drilled special rule or arcane urgency, I guess travel mystical pathways is the other one. Let's look at it as if the example was the chariot is the thing that's trying to get around us, because the narrower your opponent's frontage, the harder it is to trap them. You can still do it comfortably. You've just got to be a little bit more precise. So we're here. We've committed towards the chariot, we've managed to cast our arcane urgency, but where do we go to? Well, we could go 1 inch away, and that's fine, but how do we maximize? The correct thing to do is to work out what your opponent's wheel is, because if you go just within so that their wheel would be clipping you, they still can't, get around you, but you've got more frontage. So the easy way to do that is just to measure. So these are on 60mm bases. A 60mm base is roughly 2.35 inches. So as long as you're 2.3 from the front of it, they won't be able to wheel. And just let's show that as an example. As you can see here, when they've maximized their wheel from here to here, we're looking at just over 2.3 inches. So all we're going to do is we're going to park the dragon slightly inside of where they want to be. So if we put that back where it was, jobs are good, and get rid of the battlefield deployment again. And you can see, while it looks like the chariot's a little bit further away, it means that we've got more vision on them. Why is this important? Well, let's have a look at our vision arcs. So you can see here, if we were an inch forwards, if we were here, just an inch away, we've got much less vision. And it depends what your opponent's got. This may end up being the right choice, and we'll talk about how you counter this. So we'll get to that. But as it stands, if you're here, you have less vision of here. And it just means that you're less likely to mess up and give your opponent an opportunity to get out by weird positioning. So in this case, let's just demonstrate again. Let's just imagine this wooden isn't here. Maybe it's a hill, something like that. How's the chariot getting out? Well, it can't wheel and march like so because it clips into our base. So because it can't do that, the only way it can move is to move sideways, which if we give it an 8-inch move, half of it sideways, it's not getting in. Just do the same on the other side. You can see it's not getting out there. And if it is to use 25% of its movement to move sideways and then moves in a straight line forwards, it's still within our arc. And it's important that you do only move in a straight line because you can only do a single maneuver. So your opponent can't rotate 25 degree, can't rotate 90 degrees and then, wheel. If you were doing this and wheeling like this or something, that is unfortunately 2 maneuvers, so you can't get out. So this is how you lock people in, which is nice and easy to do, and as I say, you can maximize it here. Why are you going to maximize it? Well, that's another reason. So let's go back to trying to charge the Chaos Knights. So how do we play around our opponent having some sort of movement spell? I'm not going to show an example here on how to play around Travel Mystical Pathways. Maybe that's a separate video I need to do. The basic premise against TMP is that you measure out where your opponent can get to, and you just use your units to fill up the space that they can teleport into. They can't get within 6 inches of you, they've got to be within 12, so you can fully blank out the area that they would be in and make it very difficult for them. It does rely on you full sending, so it's something that you've got to be careful doing, but that's relatively easy to set up, or easy in concept, maybe a little bit difficult in practice. But let's talk about what you can do if your opponent's got Arcane Urgency. So this unit here, we're going to say it's an Exalted Sorcerer, it's got Battle Magic, they've got Arcane Urgency. Arcane Urgency has a 15-inch range. So you can see here, currently not in range of the Chaos Knights, but it can comfortably move. That's not a problem at all. Now, my dragon is at a bizarre angle, and this is different when you're playing around terrain. I wanted to show it just as sort of the base example. Maybe you catch your opponent out in the open, or maybe you're towed into the woods so you can see through them, or maybe there's no line of sight blocking terrain in that bit of the board. It'll vary up depending on terrain, but this is just the basic setup that you're wanting to go for. Now, why have I set up my dragon like so? Because it's a bizarre angle. Well, here you can see what my vision arc is, and in this example, the Chaos Knights are unable to get out again without using Arcane Urgency, and we've measured it out very particularly. So the basic thing to do is to make sure that the vision is less than their movement if they just move sideways. If you do that, they shouldn't be able to get out by reforming, and it varies unit to unit, so make sure you've got everything in mind. But let's say this unit of Chaos Knights walks sideways, 3.5 inches. Oh, look, they're just still within my charge arc there. I can see them. So that's what we're trying to set up. Let's put them back. So we've made it so that the Chaos Knights have to move twice. Obviously, if they go sideways this way, yes, you can still see them. Weirdly enough, they are in your massive charge arc. So what are we going to do? Well, there's two options. They can either go sideways and then try and move, but because we've arrayed more to the right, they still can't wheel past us without clipping. I'm a little bit too far back there. So yeah, we've made it so they can't wheel past us without clipping, and that's easy enough to set up if you just pre-measure it. So they can't go sideways, which means that they have to basically reform if they want to march out of there, because that's the safe thing to do. They could either Arcane Urgency sideways twice, which means that the wizard has to come sideways, or they go in a marching column and then move to the left. That's the safer way of doing things. So how are they going to set it up? Let's have a look. So let's go into a single wide column, and they have moved. Yeah, use 25% of the move to move sideways. Remember, they've used a maneuver, so all they can do is move sideways. Move straight forward, sorry, which is 4.75 inches is 3/4. So this unit has used a quarter of their move to turn each model 90 degrees, and it's each model. And then they've used 3/4 of their move just to walk sideways. And now the Exalted Sorcerer is trying to cast on them. And because they're in marching column, if they get the spell off, they're pretty comfortable to just do a wheel and then march. There is a better way of doing it. You probably just have to wheel further to get out of the charge arc here. Maybe I've not arrayed it particularly well. Maybe it would have been better in this case to reform into a marching column of 2 wide, or to march around this way, but it's definitely possible. So if we go back to it, you'd think, well, how are we going to deal with that? We want to set up overlapping charge arcs as the basic premise. So because the chariot needs to be in range of them, if they go this way, you want to have the griffin or your second dragon or your unit of knights basically just covering it so that they can't get past. So you're not going to necessarily need to move this model quite as far forwards. But if we put the charge arcs on, something like this might be the way to go. So you're covering your angles as much as possible. And it gets very difficult to make it so it's impossible for them to do anything at all. But I think something like this should pretty much cover you entirely with the movement. 21-inch move on their second move, they're going to really struggle. So if they went into 2 columns here and then went sideways, and this is their entire move because they've reformed, and then they try and march 21 inches, they're going to go like this, 2.7. Yeah, they've got not enough movement there, and if they go for less of a wheel, are they able to get out on this angle? Because you've got to get past this line here. They're able to get out of the dragon, but they're not able to get out of the griffin. So basically you want to set up overlapping charge arcs with your secondary threats. Let's go back to how it was. It was over here. Maybe you want to put them into marching column and then try and charge them around. That is something you could probably do. So let's say that they go into marching column of 2, they reform like so. This works particularly well if the chariot is out of range to cast on them. If the chariot's able to move into range to cast on them, it makes this harder to catch. So when you're picking your target, you basically want to pick something that the chariot has to move towards them to cast Arcane Urgency on them. In this very specific scenario, I would have picked a better unit to go for if possible, because they could just reform into a 1 wide and then the chariot could cast Arcane Urgency on them. But let's just assume that they can't do this. So they've reformed into a 2 wide marching column and they're just going to run around the back of the dragon and the griffin, and they're going to get out of there and they're going to be over here out of the fight until turn 3 earliest, but not dead to a dragon or a griffin. Okay, great. The problem is, to get into range, the sorcerer had to move sideways, and it's currently within charge arc of 2 different threats. And obviously you could probably outrange the noble here, but with the positioning of the griffin, you can't outrange both of them. This is a very case-by-case basis. As I said before, it changes based on terrain, but this is the basic premise of what you're trying to go for. If your opponent has a way to get out of it, Arcane Urgency, set up overlapping charge arcs like so that basically you've got all of this covered. All of this is a dead zone. There's really nothing they can do in any of here that's safe for them to stand. This is your domain. So in this situation, what do you do against the Arcane Urgency? Because this seems like it's too strong. You shouldn't be able to just force beneficial trade on turn 1 if you've got the dragon. And I agree with that, as much as I enjoy having the dragon. And there are ways you can play around it. So there's 2 obvious ways. Because the dragon moves 40 inches, it, flies 20 and it flies 20 again, it does mean that you can't really just cower in a corner. You can set up like a big anvil, where if the dragon charges something and kills it, it then overruns into something that you are comfortable having a dragon in combat with. So if you're playing something like dwarves, you've got, your overlapping charge arcs, so maybe you've got the shooting unit in front of the big combat res brick. I know that was something that Richie used to do earlier on in his dwarf play. That's one of the options. I don't love that. I think you're still giving your opponent a lot of flexibility, because all they have to do is test a restrain after killing whatever unit they've charged. There's also panic risks when you flee through the enemy unit, which if you're playing dwarves is not necessarily a high risk, but dice be dice. I think there's issues with that. Sometimes it's going to be your best option, but not all the time. The first option that I like is putting your chaff in front of your units. So let's say I'm here. I've got my unit of Chaos Knights, but I'm aware that my opponent has a dragon with Arcane Urgency, and they might just try and drop Arcane Urgency on top of me. So how do I fix that? Well, instead of deploying on the line, what if I went like this, and I made it so that I knew I had room to wheel? So we're actually going quite far back, like so. So we've got plenty of room here, and we're going to put the dogs on the line. Now, because all they're doing is screening out, we are going to go 2. In fact, 2 wide. Let's go 1 wide. We're just literally just using them to take up space. So we're going like here. Now, obviously the dragon could go in front of them, so maybe you do a double whammy. You put some skirmishing Marauder Cav in front here, like so, taking up the space. You could go something like this, and just make it very difficult for your opponent to get where they want to be. They can't park a dragon in there. So this has protected your unit of Chaos Knights. The only thing that is risking being killed is the Chaos Warhounds, but realistically, because they're in marching column, it's very hard for the dragon to shut them down. If the dragon is sat here, they just go, all right, I'm going to march 21 inches, or I guess 18 inches because they're going through the woods. But look at that. They're well out of the way. Or, potentially if they wanted to, they could stay still and just try and set up some sort of weird overrun, whatever. The Marauder Cav, this unit is skirmishers, so they can just go like so. Not a care in the world. The only issue they would have is if they fail a march test, but even then, you're probably pretty okay just to be like, okay, I'm just going to, move them all 8 inches, something like so. Sure, the dragon can charge them, but they're pretty comfortably out the way. And because the dragon can't charge turn 1, you've bought yourself a lot of space for this more valuable unit to wheel, get out the way, and you've still got the options of casting spells on them or just marching. If you are going for this sort of plan, I'd make sure you've got your general in range of them to give them the leadership bubble. If you're having to test for march tests, you don't want to fail it. Although in this case, yeah, if you deployed them ever so slightly back, you could probably just make it so I can't get comfortably in range to march block them. Yeah, here, like, this is not a good position for me to put my dragon. I'd be maybe more tempted to put it something like here, but this is much easier for you to get out of. You're just, going to march forwards, depending on the units. If we're talking infantry, you're a little bit screwed, but with something like cavalry, you've got the flexibility to get out. So this is the first way you can defend your units. It's always important to bring chaff. You're probably going to put them down first anyway, because you want to see what your opponent's doing. Obviously, when you're playing against an Arcane Urgency Dragon, it is the last drop your opponent has, so you kind of have to call your shot a little bit beforehand. But here, we've very comfortably deployed and protected this unit of Chaos Knights from the dragon. It's not really cost me anything. The Warhounds can Vanguard, so if it looks like I'm not going to put my dragon over here, they could Vanguard turn 1, go like this, or even just reform and then move as normal. So barely any loss of efficiency here, and it does protect me from just getting points turn 1. The other thing you can do is, let's say you want to have your wizard on the front line because I've deployed mine first. You've got additional range on your dispel, so you want to start the game with my wizard in range of you for dispelling, or something along those lines. You could put it over here, make it a little bit more safe, but you wanted to have it on the front line for a reason. How are we going to defend it? Because as we've shown, the wizard is unable to get out of range unless it casts Arcane Urgency. Well, something you can do is put your own threat behind it, and this is similar to the overrun, but this is more just of a zoning, threatening piece. So in this case, I don't want my dragon to be tied up in combat with the Chaos Dragon. We're both pretty evenly matched. It doesn't make much difference. Like, the Chaos Lord's got +1 wound, +1 strength, +1 attack, but I've got better saves. It kind of comes out in the wash. We could spend all game tied up together, but, I'm closer to you. So you can do various things. You can set up your charge arcs so that if I charge in here into the chariot, as long as I don't kill it, I'm kind of out in the open, which makes it a very risky charge for me. But also the positioning means that I would have to maximize here if I could. So this chariot, if I decided that I wanted to take the charge, if I gave ground, I'd stay here. The dragon's locked in combat, and then I can come around with my dragon because I've got fly. I can fly forwards, wheel, make contact with this corner, and then, level up. Or if you fall back in good order, and do make sure that you're not going to just run off the board. This is something I've pre-measured. You can see here that if I roll anything from 1 through 6, I fall through the Chaos Lord, and I just end up here. Now, this does mean that I have to take a panic check on the Chaos Lord. It is a little bit risky, but there's not really any risk-free ways of protecting all of your stuff from an Arcane Urgency Dragon as far as I'm concerned. So this is something that if I'm playing a dragon, I'm probably not wanting to risk going for the turn 1 charge into the Exalted Sorcerer, because if I do, either I, kill it and then I'm stood still, or I overrun into this dragon, which is not where I want to be, or I don't kill it, I'm tied up, or it falls back, I overrun, or I don't overrun. It's all just bad choices for me. So there you have it. That's the basics of how to use Arcane Urgency to get in, and also kind of how to get out. Remember, as they always say, like the best solution to a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. The best solution to a bad opponent with Arcane Urgency is to bring your own Arcane Urgency, bring movement to the movement fight, because that's really what Warhammer is. Thank you for watching. Thank you for getting to the end of the video. If you've reached this point and you haven't already, I would really appreciate a like, a comment, a subscription if you haven't done those things. It just helps me get seen by more people, boost me up in the algorithm, all of the stuff that the YouTubers do like to say. If you would like to support me in my goal to become a full-time YouTuber, I would absolutely appreciate that. You can become a member below. There are various perks to those, name at the end of the videos, all that good stuff, but it also unlocks some VIP areas in Discord if you become a Longbeard or Ground Knight tier supporter. Those VIP sections are the only parts that are locked away in Discord. You don't have to be a member to join the Discord. I'd recommend that you should. We've got about 450, 500 people on there. It's a great place for discussion, a lot of fun. I do try and chime in as much as possible. And it's also where the Fix My List show lists are put, and also if you are one of the Grail Knight or Longbeard tier supporters, where you participate in choosing which list I play in the monthly Pick My List series.